Hello, and welcome. Before tonight's story begins, there's something that would be lovely to know. If you feel like it, leave a comment and share where you're watching from tonight. What city, what country, what time it is where you are. It's one of the small, quiet pleasures of making these stories. Knowing that someone in Tokyo is listening at 4 in the morning, and someone in Buenos Aires is listening just after midnight, and someone in a small town in Germany is listening at the end of a long Tuesday. You are all welcome here. So if you feel like it, leave your city below, and tonight's story will reach a few more quiet corners of the world. Now settle in, get comfortable, pull the blanket up a little higher if you'd like. Close your eyes if your eyes are ready to be closed. There's nothing you need to do tonight. Nowhere you need to be. No one who needs anything from you. Tonight is just for resting. Tonight is just for letting go of the day. Slowly, softly. The way an old story unfolds when no one is in any hurry to reach the end. Tonight's story is the slow, patient history of the motorcycle. Where it came from, how it was invented, who built the first ones, what the world was like before motorcycles existed at all, and how, very gradually, year by year, decade by decade, the machine we now call a motorcycle came into being. There will be no drama tonight, no conflict, no urgent moments, just the slow, steady unfolding of one of the small, quiet stories of human invention, told gently, without any need to keep your attention. You don't have to follow every word. You don't have to remember any names or words. You don't have to learn anything tonight. The history will simply move past you the way a slow train moves past a small country station, and you can listen for as long as you like and drift off whenever you're ready, and the story will continue without you, gently, into the warm, quiet dark. So let's begin where every story like this has to begin. Let's begin in the world before the motorcycle, the world that existed before any human being had ever heard the sound of a small engine pushing a small wheeled vehicle down a small dirt road. That world is not so far away from us in the long arithmetic of history. It existed only about 150 years ago. Most of the people listening to this tonight have grandparents or great-grandparents who were born into something close to that world. It was not a fantasy. It was not a movie. It was a real world that real people lived in, and it ran on muscle and wood and water and steam and almost nothing else. Picture the world in the year 1860. Picture a small town somewhere in Central Europe, a town with cobblestone streets and stone houses and a small church with a single bell tower in the middle of the square. The streets are quiet. There are no cars. There are no airplanes. There are no electric lights. There are no radios. There are no telephones. The fastest thing in the entire town, by a wide margin, is a horse. And horses are everywhere. Horses pulling carts, horses pulling carriages, horses tied to wooden posts outside of shops, horses standing patiently in stables behind houses, horses snoring softly in the early hours of the morning while their owners sleep upstairs. The smell of the town in 1860 is a smell that we have almost completely forgotten. It is a smell of horse manure mostly, and of leather harnesses, and of wood smoke from the chimneys of houses, and of damp stone after the morning dew has settled, and of bread baking in small ovens in the back of small bakeries, and of coal being burned in the workshops of small craftsmen. The air is thicker than it is in our world, heavier, slower. The wind moves through it gently, carrying these smells from one street to another. The sounds of the town in 1860 are also sounds we have almost forgotten. The clopping of horse hooves on cobblestones, slow and measured, all day long. The clang of a blacksmith's hammer somewhere down a side street. The ringing of the church bell every hour, on the hour, marking the day for everyone who can hear it. The voices of children playing in a small courtyard. The slow creak of wooden wagon wheels as they roll past the market stalls. The chirping of birds, much louder than birds sound in our cities today, because there is so little other noise to compete with them. This is the world the motorcycle was born into. A world of slow motion. A world where distance was measured in days and weeks instead of hours and minutes. A world where most people never traveled more than 30 or 40 miles from the place they were born in their entire lives. A world where the only way to move faster than your own legs was to climb onto an animal or to climb into a vehicle pulled by an animal. Travel in this world was a serious undertaking. To go from one town to the next was a journey that required planning. You had to consider the weather. You had to consider the condition of the roads, which were often little more than dirt tracks, and which became impassable in the mud of spring and the snow of winter. You had to consider how much food and water you would need. You had to consider whether your horse could make the trip or whether you would need to rent another horse along the way. To go from one country to another was an even bigger undertaking. People who crossed national borders in 1860 did so the way astronauts in our time leave the planet, with ceremony, with preparation, with a deep awareness that they were doing something significant. Within this slow, patient world, however, something was beginning to change. Quietly in small workshops scattered across Europe and America, men with greasy hands and curious minds were beginning to experiment with a new kind of power. A power that did not come from animals. A power that did not come from human muscle. A power that did not come from wind or water. A power that came from something completely new. The controlled burning of fuel inside a sealed metal chamber. They called it the internal combustion engine, and although almost nobody in the year 1860 had ever heard of it, this strange new idea was about to change the world more completely than any other invention in human history. The earliest internal combustion engines were not designed for vehicles. They were designed for factories. They were designed to replace the steam engines that had been powering industry for almost 100 years. Steam engines were huge and heavy and slow. They needed enormous amounts of coal and water. They needed long warm-up times. They needed constant attention. The new internal combustion engines, by contrast, were small, or at least smaller. They could be started quickly. They could run on small amounts of liquid fuel. They could be turned off and on without much fuss. They were the future, and a small group of inventors knew it, even though almost nobody else did. One of those inventors was a Belgian man named Etienne Lenoir. In the early 1860s, he built one of the first practical internal combustion engines that ran on coal gas, the same kind of gas that was being used to light the street lamps of Paris and London. His engine was not very efficient. It used a lot of fuel and produced very little power, but it worked. And in 1863, Etienne Lenoir did something quietly historic. He attached one of his engines to a small wooden carriage with 3 wheels, and he drove that carriage about 10 kilometers from Paris to a small town called Joinville-le-Pont. The trip took him about 3 hours. He averaged something like 3 or 4 kilometers per hour, which is roughly the pace of a person walking. But it didn't matter. He had built one of the first vehicles in human history that moved under its own power, without an animal, without sails, without anything pushing or pulling it from the outside. Almost nobody noticed. Almost nobody cared. The carriage was loud, awkward, slow, and mostly useless. But Etienne Lenoir had quietly demonstrated something important, that an engine could move a vehicle, even if it moved that vehicle only a little, even if it moved that vehicle very slowly. The principle had been proven. And once the principle had been proven, other inventors began to think about how to do it better. For the next 20 years, throughout the 1860s and 1870s, internal combustion engines slowly improved. They became more efficient, they became more reliable, they became smaller and lighter. The fuel they used changed too. Instead of coal gas, they began to run on liquid fuels distilled from petroleum, which were more energy dense and easier to carry. By the early 1880s, the internal combustion engine had become small enough, light enough, and reliable enough that it could begin to be used not just in factories, but in vehicles. Real vehicles. Vehicles that ordinary people might one day actually use. But there was still no such thing as a motorcycle. There was no such thing as an automobile either. The only thing close to either was the bicycle, which had been around in various forms since the early 1800s. And the bicycles of the 1880s were strange machines. The most famous version was called the penny farthing. It had a huge front wheel, sometimes 5 feet tall or more, and a tiny back wheel. The rider sat directly above the front wheel, with the pedals attached directly to the wheel itself. The way a tricycle works, it was a difficult machine to ride. You had to climb up onto it from a small step at the back. You had to balance carefully, and if you ever fell, which happened often, you fell from a great height, sometimes on to your face. The penny farthing was popular for a while, especially among young men who liked to seem daring. But it was not a practical machine for ordinary people, and it was certainly not a machine that could be used for serious transportation. Then, in 1885, 2 important things happened, almost at the same time. First, the modern bicycle was invented, the kind we still ride today with 2 wheels of equal size, a chain driving the back wheel, and the rider sitting safely in the middle. This was called the safety bicycle, and it was an enormous improvement over the penny farthing. Anyone could ride it. Anyone could learn it in an afternoon. And once people realized how easy it was to ride a safety bicycle, the bicycle became one of the most important inventions of the late 19th century. By the 1890s, millions of people were riding bicycles. Cities began to build paths for them. Newspapers wrote articles about them. Songs were written about them. The bicycle changed the way ordinary people thought about distance and travel. The second important thing that happened in 1885 was that in a small workshop in Germany, two men were working very late into the night on a strange new project. Their names were Gottlieb Daimler and Wilhelm Maybach. They were inventors. They were engineers. They were two of the most brilliant minds of their generation. And what they were building on that night, and on many nights before it, was a small wooden frame with two wooden wheels, with a small internal combustion engine mounted in the middle of the frame, and a leather saddle on top, and a pair of small handles to hold on to. They called this strange machine the Reitwagen, which is a German word that means riding wagon. It was the first true motorcycle in the history of the world. We are going to spend the next part of our story with Gottlieb Daimler and Wilhelm Maybach in their small workshop. We are going to walk slowly through the year 1885 and watch this strange wooden machine come together, piece by piece, in the quiet workshop of two patient men who had no idea that they were inventing something that would still exist 140 years later, ridden by millions of people on every continent on Earth, in every language, in every climate, in every kind of weather. But before we go to the workshop, let's stay here for a moment. Let's stay in the slow, quiet world of 1885 a little longer. Let's stay in the world without motorcycles, because that world is about to disappear forever, and it's worth letting the silence of it settle into us before we watch it begin to end. Picture, one more time, the small European town in the year 1885, the cobblestone streets, the horse-drawn carts, the blacksmith's hammer ringing somewhere down a side alley, the church bell marking the hour, the slow creak of wooden wheels, the smell of bread baking in a small bakery, the smell of horses standing patiently in their stalls, the sound of 1,000 birds singing in the trees because there is so little else to drown them out. Picture an old man sitting on a wooden bench outside a small tavern. He is in his 80s. He was born in the early years of the 19th century, and he has lived his whole long life in a world where nothing moves faster than a horse. He has never heard of an automobile. He has never heard of a motorcycle. He has never seen an airplane. He has never spoken into a telephone. He has never seen an electric light. The world he knows is the world he was born into, and the world he was born into is the world that is about to end. He is sitting in the warm, late afternoon sun. He is smoking a small pipe. He is watching the children play in the square in front of him. He has no idea that 200 miles to the south, in a small workshop in the German town of Cannstatt, two patient inventors are bolting together the wooden frame of a machine that, within his grandchildren's lifetimes, will replace the horse as the most common form of personal transportation in the world. He has no idea, and it doesn't matter that he has no idea. The story is happening anyway. The world is changing anyway. The slow, quiet centuries of the horse are ending, even though the man on the bench is still smoking his pipe, even though the children are still playing in the square, even though the church bell is still ringing, the hour the way it always has. This is one of the strange and beautiful things about history. It is always happening, even when the people inside it cannot see it happening. The biggest changes in human life almost never announce themselves. They begin in small workshops, in quiet rooms, in the patient hands of men and women who have no idea that what they are doing will matter to anyone outside of themselves. And then, slowly, year by year, decade by decade, the small thing they made becomes a slightly bigger thing, and then a slightly bigger thing, and then a slightly bigger thing, until eventually it becomes a part of the everyday lives of millions of people who have never heard the names of the people who first made it. The motorcycle is one of those stories. It begins in 1885 in a wooden workshop with 2 patient men and a strange wooden machine. And from that small beginning, over the next 140 years, it grows and changes and spreads across the world until it becomes the thing it is today. A machine ridden by millions of people on every continent, for every reason imaginable. For commuting, for sport, for freedom, for pleasure, for necessity, for dreams. Tonight we are going to walk slowly through the very early years of that long story. The years when the motorcycle was just being born. The years when nobody knew what to call it, or what to do with it, or whether it was even a good idea. The years before there were highways. The years before there were paved roads. The years before there were gas stations. The years before there were any of the things we now take for granted. It is a slow, patient, gentle story. There is no hurry. There is no urgency. We are going to take the long way through it, because the long way is the only way that lets you really understand a thing. And tonight, the only thing we have to do is travel together, slowly, through the early years of one small, quiet invention that eventually changed the world. So get comfortable. Settle deeper into wherever you are. Let your shoulders drop. Let your jaw loosen. Let your eyes close. If your eyes are ready to be closed, the world of 1885 is waiting for us. The wooden workshop is waiting for us. 2 patient inventors are waiting for us. And the long, slow, beautiful story of the motorcycle is about to begin. Just rest now. Just listen. Just let the slow, soft tide of history carry you wherever it carries you tonight. There's nothing you need to do. There's nowhere you need to be. The story will unfold gently at its own pace, and you can drift away from it whenever you are ready. The motorcycle is about to be invented. But first, the world has to be very, very quiet. And tonight, the world is very, very quiet. If you're still with me, let the story continue. And if you've already drifted somewhere between the small cobblestone town of 1885 and the quiet edge of sleep, stay there. That's exactly where you belong. History unfolds best at the edge of consciousness. The slower you listen, the more you understand. The more you drift, the more the story carries you. Let's walk slowly down a narrow dirt road on the outskirts of a small German town called Cannstatt. It's the autumn of the year 1885. The trees along the road are beginning to turn, soft gold and pale orange, the way trees turn in Central Europe at the end of October. The air is cool, but not cold. The sky is a pale gray, the way the sky so often is in Germany in late October, with a thin veil of clouds that lets the afternoon light through in soft, diffused bands. Cannstatt is not a large town. It is a small collection of old stone houses and narrow, winding streets, nestled on the banks of a river called the Neckar. Today, Cannstatt is part of the much larger city of Stuttgart. But in 1885, it is still its own small place, with its own small life. And most of the people who live here work in small crafts: baking, tailoring, leatherworking, blacksmithing, carpentry. The pace of life in Cannstatt in 1885 is the slow, patient pace of every small European town in the late 19th century. Nothing rushes. The church bells ring the hours. The children go to school in the morning and come home at midday for lunch. The shops close at sundown. Families sit down together at long wooden tables and eat simple meals of bread and cheese and soup and potatoes. And then the older members of the family go to bed early, and the younger ones stay up a little later by candlelight, reading or sewing or writing letters. On a quiet side street at the edge of Cannstatt, there is a small workshop. It is a simple wooden building, 2 stories tall, with a slightly sloped roof and a narrow chimney. The walls are painted a faded gray-green. The windows are small and made of thick, hand-blown glass, and through them, even in the middle of the day, you can see the soft yellow glow of lamps burning inside. The workshop belongs to a man named Gottlieb Daimler. Inside the workshop, together with his longtime friend and partner Wilhelm Maybach, Daimler has been building something strange. Gottlieb Daimler is 51 years old. He is a serious, thoughtful, slightly formal man. He wears wire-rimmed spectacles that sit low on his nose. His hair and beard are mostly gray. He dresses in the careful way that educated Germans of his generation dressed. A dark waistcoat, a white shirt buttoned all the way up, a black bow tie, and a long apron over all of it whenever he is working. When he walks through the town, people greet him politely with a nod or a tip of the hat. He is respected in Cannstatt. He is known as a careful, honest, intelligent man. He is also known, among the few people who have spoken with him about it, as a man who has very strange ideas about the future. Wilhelm Maybach is 12 years younger than Daimler. He is in his late 30s. He is slightly shorter than Daimler, with a thick, dark mustache, sharp, intelligent eyes, and hands that are always a little stained from his work. Maybach is the finest machinist in this part of Germany. He can build almost anything with metal. He can shape a piece of iron into exactly the form his mind has imagined, within tolerances so small that most craftsmen of his era would not even believe they were possible. Daimler and Maybach have been working together for nearly 20 years. They met when Maybach was still a young orphan in a charitable school, and Daimler, who was a teacher and engineer at that school, recognized the boy's extraordinary talent and took him under his wing. They have been together ever since. Where Daimler goes, Maybach follows. Where Maybach works, Daimler designs. Together, they are one of the most quietly brilliant pairings in the history of engineering. In the autumn of 1885, Daimler and Maybach are working on a problem they have been thinking about for years. They have built, in the years just before this, a small internal combustion engine, a very small one, much smaller than the engines that came before it, much lighter, much simpler, much more reliable. They have decided that their new engine is compact enough and powerful enough to be attached to a moving vehicle. Not a carriage necessarily, not a cart. Something smaller, something simpler, something that could be ridden by a single person, something that could prove, once and for all, that their engine worked. And so, inside the small wooden workshop in Cannstatt, Daimler and Maybach have built a strange machine. It is not quite a bicycle. It is not quite a carriage. It is something in between, something that has never existed before. Let us step inside the workshop. Let us stand quietly at the back of the room, just inside the doorway, and watch. The workshop smells of linseed oil and sawdust and hot metal. A small cast iron stove in the corner burns low, keeping the room at a gentle warmth. 3 oil lamps hang from the ceiling beams, casting a soft yellow light onto the workbench that runs along the back wall. The workbench is covered with tools, hammers of various sizes, files, chisels, small metal vices, coils of copper wire, small tin cans of grease and oil, a few half-finished parts of engines, a small notebook open to a page of Daimler's careful handwriting. Above the workbench, a row of wooden shelves holds jars of nails, small brass fittings, and neatly labeled wooden boxes full of washers and springs and tiny iron pins. Everything is in its place. Daimler and Maybach are not messy men. They believe that a tidy workshop is the foundation of tidy thinking. In the middle of the workshop, on a wooden stand that holds it about 2 feet off the floor, sits the strange machine they have been building. The machine is made mostly of wood. The frame is a simple wooden rectangle. 2 parallel beams of solid ash, braced together with cross pieces of the same wood. The corners reinforced with small iron brackets. The frame looks a little like the frame of a small wooden sled, or a very simple cart. At the front and the back of the frame, there is a wheel. The wheels are wooden too. Solid spoked wheels, about 28 inches in diameter, wrapped with a thin rubber band around the outside where the wheel meets the ground. These wheels would look, to a modern eye, more like the wheels of a child's wooden wagon than the wheels of a motorcycle. But they are the wheels that Daimler and Maybach have chosen because they are simple, and simple is what they need for this first experiment. On either side of the main frame, there are 2 smaller outrigger wheels. These are attached to the frame by short wooden struts. The outrigger wheels are much smaller than the main wheels, maybe 12 inches across, and they are mounted a few inches off the ground so that they only touch the earth if the machine tilts too far to one side. Daimler and Maybach have added these small wheels because they are not completely sure that a machine powered by an engine can actually balance on only 2 wheels while moving. The idea of balancing on 2 wheels at all is still a relatively new one, even for bicycles. The safety bicycle has just been invented earlier the same year, and most people still think of 2-wheel balancing as an unreliable circus trick. So Daimler and Maybach have built their first powered machine with training wheels, just in case. They are careful men. They would rather be safe than sorry. In the middle of the wooden frame, mounted vertically, is the engine. It is small, about the size of a large bread box. It is made of polished brass and iron, with a single upright cylinder and a small horizontal flywheel at the base. The engine has been designed by Daimler and built by Maybach, and it represents years of their combined work. It has a tiny carburetor that mixes air and liquid fuel. It has a small ignition system powered by a platinum hot tube, which glows red when the engine is running and ignites the fuel mixture inside the cylinder. It has a small brass tank above it that holds a little over a liter of gasoline, a fuel that is still so new and so unfamiliar in 1885 that most people in Germany have never even seen it. It is sold in very small quantities at pharmacies, usually as a cleaning solvent for stains on clothing. Daimler has to place special orders for the amounts he needs for his experiments. Above the engine, directly above the frame, is a simple leather saddle. It is the same kind of saddle that is used on bicycles of this era. A hard, narrow leather seat with two small springs underneath to soften the bumps of the road. The saddle is mounted on a wooden post that rises from the middle of the frame. Behind the saddle, there's a small wooden backrest, a thin, curved piece of wood covered in a piece of leather, because Daimler has decided that a rider will appreciate a little support for his lower back while sitting on the machine. Daimler is a thoughtful man. He designs for comfort, even in his very first experimental vehicles. At the front of the frame, rising from the front wheel, is a single wooden pole that serves as the steering column. At the top of the pole are two small wooden handles. The handles are simply round pieces of polished wood, about the size of a man's hand, mounted horizontally on either side of the pole. There are no cables. There are no brakes attached to the handles. There are no levers. There are no gauges. The handles simply turn the front wheel. The rider holds onto them. That is all. This machine has no speedometer, no headlight, no tail light, no horn, no kickstand, no key, no electrical system of any kind other than the small hot tube ignition on the engine itself. It is the simplest possible powered two-wheeled vehicle that can be imagined. Daimler and Maybach have stripped away every feature that is not absolutely necessary, because every unnecessary feature adds weight, and every extra gram of weight makes their small engine work harder. The machine is called the Reitwagen. In German, that word means, roughly, riding wagon or riding cart. Daimler chose the name because the machine is something you sit on and ride, the way you would sit on and ride a horse. The name is practical, descriptive, and unromantic. Daimler is not trying to poeticize his invention. He is trying to describe it clearly so that if the idea catches on, people will know what to call it. Throughout the autumn of 1885, Daimler and Maybach have been testing the Reitwagen in the streets around their workshop. The test runs are short. They are careful. They are mostly done in the early mornings, before the townspeople are out and about. Because Daimler is a private man and does not want the attention of curious crowds. On November 10th, 1885, a cool Tuesday morning with a light mist hanging in the air, Daimler's oldest son, a 17-year-old named Paul, climbs onto the Reitwagen and makes the first real documented ride on a two-wheeled motor vehicle in human history. The ride is from Cannstatt to a neighboring village called Untertürkheim and back. The total distance is about 6 miles. Paul rides slowly because the machine is not capable of going fast. The top speed of the Reitwagen is about 7 miles per hour, roughly the pace of a person jogging. The engine puts out about half of 1 horsepower. That is less power than a small lawnmower today. But it is enough power to move Paul and the small wooden machine forward along the dirt roads of the Neckar Valley under the gray sky of a November morning in 1885. Paul rides with his father and Maybach, walking beside him, or sometimes jogging beside him, the three of them moving slowly down the quiet country roads. The Reitwagen is loud. The single cylinder of the little engine makes a steady, rhythmic pop, 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 pop sound, not unlike the sound of a small water pump. The rubber-covered wooden wheels roll along the dirt with a soft rumbling noise. A thin trail of blue smoke rises from the exhaust and drifts away behind them. A few farm animals along the road look up in surprise. A cow grazing in a pasture lifts her head and stares. A pair of chickens in a farmyard squawk and flap their wings and run in confused circles. A farmer leaning on a fence watches the strange procession pass by, with his mouth slightly open, as if he is seeing something he cannot quite believe. And he is. He is seeing something that no farmer in the history of the world has ever seen before. He is watching a young man ride, with no horse beneath him, on a small wooden machine that moves by itself, making a strange, rhythmic noise, trailing a thin blue cloud of smoke. It is not a big, dramatic moment. It does not feel important at the time to anyone who is watching. It is just 3 men and a strange contraption on a country road. But that moment, in that soft November morning, in the Neckar Valley of southern Germany, is the beginning of everything we now know as the motorcycle. Every Harley-Davidson, every Honda, every Ducati, every BMW, every Indian, every Yamaha, every small scooter in Rome, every bright dirt bike in rural Argentina, every touring bike parked outside a diner on Route 66. Every single one of them is descended in some long, quiet genealogical line from the small wooden Reitwagen that Paul Daimler is riding down the muddy road from Cannstatt to Untertürkheim on the morning of November the 10th, 1885. Paul rides to the end of the village and turns around and rides slowly back. The whole journey takes about an hour and a half. When he returns to the workshop, the engine is still running, the fuel tank is not yet empty, and the machine is in perfect working order. Daimler and Maybach are pleased. They are quietly, deeply pleased. They do not celebrate loudly. They do not throw a party. They do not write long, excited letters to anyone. They simply look at each other and they nod. And they say a few soft words in German to each other. And then they push the Reitwagen back into the workshop and close the door. And they begin to think about what to improve next. Daimler writes a brief entry in his notebook that night. November 10th, 1885. Reitwagen test successful. 6 miles. No failures. Paul very pleased. Small adjustments needed to carburetor. We'll continue experiments tomorrow. That is all. One of the most important dates in the history of transportation is recorded in his private notebook in a single sentence of calm, methodical handwriting. Daimler is a man who keeps his emotions to himself. He is a man who does not yet know and cannot possibly know that what he has built on this cool November morning is something the world will remember for as long as humans are still alive. To remember anything. Over the next few months, Daimler and Maybach continue to refine the Reitwagen. They make small improvements. They adjust the carburetor. They strengthen the wooden frame. They replace the rubber wheel coverings when they begin to wear. They experiment with different kinds of fuel mixtures. They keep careful notes. They are, above all else, patient men. They are not trying to rush anything. They are trying to understand everything. They are also, at the same time, working on another project, a larger one, a 4-wheeled carriage powered by a bigger version of their small engine. This four-wheeled carriage will eventually become known as the Daimler Motorwagen, and it will be one of the first real automobiles in history. The Reitwagen for Daimler and Maybach is really just a stepping stone on the way to the automobile. It is a test vehicle. It is a small, two-wheeled platform that lets them work out the bugs in their engine before they commit the engine to a larger, more complicated machine. They do not fully realize, although perhaps they sense it dimly in the backs of their minds, that the small two-wheeled test vehicle they have built is just as important as the four-wheeled carriage they are planning. They do not realize that they have, in fact, invented two completely new forms of transportation at almost the same time. The automobile and the motorcycle, born together in the same workshop in the same year by the same two men. It is one of the strangest coincidences in the history of invention. Two different futures, born simultaneously in the same quiet Cannstatt workshop, side by side, in the soft yellow lamplight of a German autumn. After 1886, Daimler and Maybach will mostly focus on the four-wheeled automobile. They will not build another motorcycle. They will leave the development of the motorcycle to other inventors in other countries who will see what Daimler and Maybach have started and carry it forward. But the Reitwagen itself will be preserved. It will be set aside in a small storage building next to the Daimler workshop, carefully maintained, and then eventually displayed as a museum piece. And it is still there today, in a museum in Stuttgart, in a quiet hall where visitors can walk slowly past the strange wooden machine and look at it and try to imagine the cool November morning in 1885 when Paul Daimler first rode it down the muddy road to Untertürkheim. The Reitwagen is not beautiful in the way we think of modern motorcycles as beautiful. It is not fast. It is not elegant. It is not comfortable. If you saw it today, without knowing what it was, you might walk past it without a second glance. It looks like a strange wooden carnival prop. It looks like something a child might have built in a school project. It does not look like the ancestor of every modern motorcycle. It does not look like the beginning of anything important at all. But that is almost always the way with the beginnings of important things. The beginnings are small. The beginnings are quiet. The beginnings are made in wooden workshops by patient men who do not know that they are making history. History is recognized only in retrospect. At the time, it just feels like work. It just feels like another slow Tuesday in a small German town. It just feels like another test run of another experimental machine that may or may not work. Nobody in 1885, including Daimler and Maybach themselves, knows that the Reitwagen is the first motorcycle. The Reitwagen is just the Reitwagen. It will take decades before anyone, looking back, understands what that strange wooden machine really was. But we can understand it now. We can look back through 140 years of history and see the small wooden frame and the single upright cylinder and the leather saddle and the thin trail of blue smoke. And we can see clearly, calmly, from our long distance, that we are watching the very first chapter of a very long story, a story that will eventually spread across every country in the world, a story that will eventually include factories and racing teams and wars and adventures and friendships and long, quiet rides down country roads at dawn. A story that will eventually include you in whatever small way you have been touched by motorcycles in your own life. A story that begins on a cool November morning on a muddy road in the Neckar Valley with a 17-year-old boy named Paul and a small wooden machine that goes pop, 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 pop as it rolls slowly forward into the future. The workshop is quiet now. The right wagon is parked on its wooden stand. The oil lamps are burning low. Daimler is sitting at his workbench, making notes in his notebook. Maybach is cleaning a small brass part with a soft cloth. The cast iron stove in the corner is making small popping sounds as the wood inside it settles. Outside, the November afternoon is fading into evening. The sky is turning a deep, soft gray. A few early stars are beginning to appear above the chimneys of the houses. The church bell in Cannstatt rings 5 times, slowly, the sound carrying softly through the cold air. Daimler writes the last sentence of the day in his notebook. He sets down his pen. He closes the notebook gently. He looks across the workshop at Maybach, and Maybach looks back at him, and the two men share a small, quiet smile. They do not need to say anything. They have known each other for 20 years. They understand each other perfectly. Outside the workshop, in the small, quiet town of Cannstatt, the horses are being led back into their stables for the night. The bakers are closing up their shops. The tavern keepers are lighting the lamps above their doors. The children are being called in from the square for their supper. The church bell finishes its 5 chimes and fades into silence. The long, quiet evening of November 10th, 1885, settles over Cannstatt like a warm blanket, and the world goes about its evening the way it has gone about its evenings for centuries. And inside a small wooden workshop on a narrow side street, a strange little wooden machine sits quietly on its stand. A machine that has just made its first real journey. A machine that has just begun the long, slow, beautiful story of the motorcycle. A machine that does not know and cannot know that it is the grandfather of millions and millions of machines that will come after it all over the world, across every continent and every decade. For as long as human beings still want to ride 2 wheels down a long road under an open sky. Tonight, while you rest, the right wagon sits quietly in the Cannstatt workshop. Tomorrow morning, Paul will ride it again. A few weeks from now, Daimler and Maybach will move on to other projects. A few years from now, other inventors in other countries will begin to build their own 2-wheeled, powered machines, each one a little different, each one a little better, each one another slow, patient step along the long road that will eventually lead to the modern motorcycle. But all of that is still ahead of us in the story. All of that is still to come. For now, in the quiet of 1885, the very first motorcycle has just been ridden, and the world has barely noticed, and the slow, kind centuries of the horse still hold on for a little while longer. Rest now. The workshop is warm. The lamps are low. The inventors are quiet. The right wagon is still. The autumn evening is falling softly across Cannstatt, and all of us, listening together tonight, are sitting quietly inside the very first chapter of one of the gentlest stories human beings have ever written. Let yourself drift. Let the history hold you. Let the slow, patient, soft hum of a world before motorcycles carry you wherever you are going tonight. If you're still with me, let the story continue. And if you've drifted off somewhere in the Cannstatt workshop of 1885, stay there. History is patient. It doesn't mind if you miss a decade here or there. The story's happening anyway. The years are passing. The small inventions are being made. The world is slowly, quietly, almost imperceptibly changing. When you come back to the story, whenever you come back, the story will still be waiting for you, the way old stories always wait. Let's move the clock forward. Let's skip quietly past the rest of 1885, and past 1886, and past 1887, and past 1888, and past 1889. Daimler and Maybach are in their workshop doing other things. They are building bigger engines. They're designing four-wheeled carriages. They are moving on from the right wagon. The wooden motorcycle is sitting quietly in a storage shed, gathering a soft layer of dust. It has served its purpose. It has proven that an engine can move a small, two-wheeled vehicle. Now Daimler and Maybach are focused on larger things. But while they are focused elsewhere, other inventors are beginning to wake up to the possibilities that Daimler and Maybach have opened across Europe in small workshops and garages and family-owned factories. A handful of patient men are beginning to think about the two-wheeled machine. They read about Daimler's experiments in small engineering journals. They see, dimly, what might be possible. They begin to sketch their own designs, to build their own engines, to experiment with their own small-powered vehicles. And in the year 1894, 9 years after Daimler's Reitwagen, the very first motorcycle that is actually sold to the public as a finished commercial product is built in the German city of Munich. Let's travel there now. Let's move from the quiet river valley of Cannstatt about 100 miles south to the larger, busier city of Munich. Munich in 1894 is a grand, old Bavarian city with wide boulevards and tall stone buildings and beer halls full of warm yellow light. It is the capital of Bavaria. It has museums and palaces and universities. It is also, quietly, becoming a small center of the new kind of mechanical inventiveness that is beginning to spread across Europe. And on a busy side street in the middle of the city, two brothers named Henry and Wilhelm Hildebrand have opened a small workshop with their friend Alois Wolfmuller. The Hildebrand brothers and Wolfmuller are serious men. They are experienced engineers. They have been working for a few years on their own kind of two-wheeled motor vehicle. And by 1894, they believe they have perfected it. They believe that their machine is ready, not just to be a one-of-a-kind experimental prototype like Daimler's Reitwagen, but to be built in quantity and sold to ordinary people who might want to buy one. They call their machine the Hildebrand and Wolfmuller Motorrad. That word, Motorrad, is a German word they coin specifically to describe their new invention. It is formed from two words, motor, which means engine, and rad, which means wheel. Motor wheel. A wheel with an engine. The name is simple and practical and descriptive. And in the decades that follow, this word, Motorrad, will become the standard German word for motorcycle. And it is still used in Germany today, and in Austria, and in Switzerland, and in a few other places across the world where German is spoken. Every every time a German person uses that word, they're using the word that Hildebrand and Wolfmüller invented in their small Munich workshop in the year 1894. The Hildebrand and Wolfmüller Motorrad is a strange-looking machine, even stranger than the Reitwagen. It is made of steel tubing, arranged in a shape somewhat like a modern bicycle, but with several unusual features. The engine is not a single upright cylinder, like Daimler's. It is a horizontal two-cylinder engine, with two long pistons that run parallel to the ground, pointing backwards. The pistons are attached by connecting rods directly to the rear wheel, not through a chain or a belt, the way modern motorcycles work, but directly, like the pistons of an old steam locomotive. The rear wheel is not a bicycle wheel. It is a larger, heavier iron wheel, solid and unforgiving, because the pistons need something sturdy to push against. And because the pistons are connected directly to the wheel, the engine can only run when the wheel is turning, and the wheel can only turn when the engine is running, which makes the whole machine surprisingly difficult to start. The rider has to push the motorcycle down the street for some distance, running alongside it until the rear wheel begins to turn fast enough to get the pistons moving. Only then can the rider jump onto the saddle and ride. The Motorrad is also remarkable for another reason. There is no carburetor in the modern sense. Instead, there is a small surface vaporizer, a shallow tank of gasoline that the engine sucks fuel vapor off of as it runs. There's no clutch, there's no transmission, there's no gearbox, there's no neutral. There's only the engine, the pistons, the rear wheel, and the rider. The whole machine is a kind of rolling mechanical simplicity, beautiful and frustrating in equal measure. And yet, despite all of its quirks, the Hildebrand and Wolfmüller Motorrad works. It runs. It moves. It can reach a top speed of about 25 miles per hour, much faster than the Reitwagen, and much faster than a horse could pull a carriage along the same roads. It is the first two-wheeled motor vehicle in the world to be built in a real factory, advertised to the public, and sold to ordinary customers. Between 1894 and 1897, the Hildebrand and Wolfmüller workshop will build about 2,000 Motorrads. Not a huge number, not even close to the numbers that will come later in the 20th century. But 2,000 is a real number. 2,000 actual customers. 2,000 riders across Germany and other parts of Europe who became, without knowing it, the first generation of motorcyclists in the history of the world. Most of those 2,000 Motorrads are now lost. They were ridden, they wore out, they broke down, they were eventually scrapped for parts. A handful have survived in museums, carefully preserved, polished, displayed behind glass, studied by scholars and admired by curious visitors. If you go to a motorcycle museum today, almost anywhere in the world, there is a reasonable chance that you will see a Hildebrand and Wolfmüller Motorrad somewhere in the collection. They are the most important surviving examples of the earliest commercial motorcycles, and each one is a small relic of the year 1894, when the idea of a motor wheel was still so new that a German word had to be invented just to name it. The Hildebrand and Wolfmüller Company does not last long. By 1897, the partnership dissolves. The motorads proved to be too expensive for most people to afford. The mechanical quirks of the design make them difficult to maintain. Other inventors are beginning to build their own, better designed motorcycles. The company closes its doors. The factory is sold. The Hildebrand brothers and Wolfmüller go their separate ways. But they have done their work. They have taken Daimler's idea out of the experimental workshop and brought it into the commercial marketplace. They have made motorcycles a real product, sold to real people for real money. And from this point on, the development of the motorcycle is no longer just a question of a few patient inventors in private workshops. It is now a commercial industry with factories and employees and advertisements and customers. The motorcycle has entered the world. Let us move the clock forward again. Let us skip past 1897 and past 1898 and past 1899. Let us cross the Atlantic Ocean for the first time in our story. Let us leave Europe behind for a little while and travel to the United States, where the next great chapter of the motorcycle story is about to begin. In the year 1900, the United States is a country that is changing quickly. The cities are growing. The population is expanding. The long, quiet 19th century is ending. Electric lights are appearing in the homes of the wealthy. Streetcars powered by electricity are replacing horse-drawn omnibuses in the biggest cities. Telephones are being installed in offices and in a few private homes. The first experimental automobiles are beginning to appear on American roads, mostly in the hands of curious inventors and wealthy enthusiasts, still seen as exotic oddities by ordinary people. And in a small workshop in Springfield, Massachusetts, two men are beginning to think about motorcycles. Their names are George Hendy and Oscar Hedstrom. Hendy is a tall, broad-shouldered former professional bicycle racer in his late 30s. He has the confident, easy manner of a man who has spent years competing against other men and winning. Hedstrom is a slightly younger man, originally from Sweden, with a thick mustache and the quiet, focused demeanor of a man who prefers his own company and his own tools. The two men met a few years earlier at a bicycle race. Hendy was impressed by Hedstrom's mechanical skill. Hedstrom was impressed by Hendy's ability to raise money and organize projects. The two decided to work together. Hendy, by 1900, owns a successful bicycle manufacturing company in Springfield. The company makes a brand of bicycles called Indian, named after the native people of North America. Hendy has always been proud of the name. He thinks it evokes strength, speed, and a certain noble quality. The Indian brand is well known among American cyclists. Hendy's bicycles are respected for their quality construction, their smooth ride, their elegant design. In early 1901, Hendig and Hedstrom decide to try something new. They decide to attach a small gasoline engine to one of their Indian bicycle frames. They decide to build an American motorcycle. Let us step into their workshop in Springfield. It is a small brick building on the edge of the city, with tall windows that let in the soft gray light of a New England winter morning. The floor is made of wooden planks, darkened by years of use. The air smells of oil and sawdust and the faint sweetness of pine soap, which the workers use to clean their hands at the end of the day. A small coal stove at the back of the workshop keeps the room warm. 3 or 4 workbenches line the walls, each one covered with tools and parts and half-finished projects. A bicycle frame is mounted on a small stand in the middle of the room. A black enameled Indian frame with nickel-plated trim, beautiful in its own quiet way. The kind of bicycle that wealthy men in Boston or New York might buy for their Sunday rides in the park. Hedstrom is standing beside the frame with a small gasoline engine in his hands. The engine is his own design. He's been working on it for several months. It is a single-cylinder engine about the size of a grapefruit, cast out of black painted iron and polished brass. It is small enough to fit, with some careful adjustment, into the diamond-shaped frame of the Indian bicycle. Hedstrom has designed the engine specifically for this purpose. He has thought carefully about the weight, the balance, the cooling, the fuel supply, the ignition system. He is a careful thinker. He is not in any hurry. He wants the engine to work perfectly the first time, because he knows that if the first motorcycle they build does not work, Hindi will lose faith in the project, and the whole experiment will end. Hedstrom bolts the engine into the frame, slowly, using the tools on his workbench. The engine sits in the lower section of the frame, just behind the front wheel, held in place by small metal brackets that Hedstrom has machined himself. Above the engine, in the top tube of the frame, there is a small cylindrical gasoline tank, an elegant brass tank with a screw-on cap, polished to a mirror finish. A thin copper fuel line runs from the tank down to the engine. A small flat leather drive belt runs from the engine to the rear wheel, carrying the engine's power to the wheel without the clanking of a chain. The result, once Hedstrom is finished, is a machine that looks remarkably like a bicycle with a small brass engine strapped to it, because that is exactly what it is. This first motorcycle that Hindi and Hedstrom build in the spring of 1901 in their Springfield workshop is small and simple and quiet. The engine produces about 1 3/4 horsepower. The top speed is about 25 miles per hour. The machine weighs about 98 pounds, light enough to be pushed easily by a single man. It is a well-designed, thoughtful, beautifully made machine. When Hedstrom takes it outside for its first test ride on a cool morning in May of 1901, it starts on the first try and runs smoothly for several miles along the quiet roads outside Springfield. Hendy follows behind in a horse-drawn carriage, watching carefully, taking notes. He is pleased. They both are. They decide, then and there, to begin selling the machine commercially. They will call it the Indian motorcycle, spelled without the R, because Hedstrom believes that word sounds a little cleaner, a little more modern, a little more distinctive. They will build them in small numbers at first. They will advertise them carefully. They will sell them only to customers who can appreciate their quality. The first year of production, 1901, Indian builds about 3 motorcycles. By 1902, they are building more. By 1903, they are building a few hundred. And from that small beginning, over the next 20 years, Indian will grow into one of the largest and most respected motorcycle manufacturers in the world. Indian motorcycles will race in Europe. Indian motorcycles will be ridden by American police officers. Indian motorcycles will be used by the United States military during the First World War. Indian will become, for a long time, the largest motorcycle company in the world. And all of that starts in the quiet brick workshop in Springfield, Massachusetts, in the spring of 1901, with Oscar Hedstrom bolting his first engine into an Indian bicycle frame, while George Hendy watches carefully from across the room. But Indian is not the only American motorcycle company being founded in these early years. 240 miles to the west, in the city of Milwaukee, Wisconsin, another small group of young men is also beginning to think about motorcycles. Let us travel there now. Let us move from Springfield to Milwaukee. Let us sit in on another small workshop in another small corner of America where another quiet beginning is taking place. It is the autumn of the year 1901. In a modest wooden shed behind the home of a Milwaukee family named Davidson, 4 young men are working together on a project that they have been thinking about for a long time. Their names are William S. Harley, Arthur Davidson, Walter Davidson, and William A. Davidson. Harley is 21 years old. He is a quiet, serious young man with glasses and a thoughtful manner. Arthur Davidson is 20. He is Harley's best friend, a bright mechanical tinkerer with a sense of humor and a love of fishing. Walter Davidson is 25. He is Arthur's older brother, and he is just as mechanically talented, but a bit more serious. William A. Davidson is 30, the oldest Davidson brother, and he works at the local railroad as a tool maker, which means he has access to excellent tools and excellent machining skills. The Davidson shed is small. It is about 10 feet by 15 feet. It has a wooden floor, a single window, and a small coal stove in one corner. The walls are lined with shelves and pegs holding tools and parts. A single kerosene lamp hangs from the ceiling, giving off a soft yellow light in the evenings when the young men come back to the shed after their day jobs. William Harley and Arthur Davidson have been working in their spare time for the last year or so on the design of a small gasoline engine. They have been studying designs from the French mechanical journal De Dion Bouton, which has become very influential among inventors on both sides of the Atlantic. They have also been looking at the designs of the Hildebrand and Wolfmiller Motorrad, and the Indian motorcycle in Springfield, and several other small motorcycle designs that have appeared in American engineering magazines. They have studied all of these designs, and they have decided that they can do better, or at least they can do their own version. For most of 1901, they work on the engine. They build a small single-cylinder engine about the same size as Hedstrom's, but with a few different design choices. Their engine has a slightly larger displacement, about 116 cubic centimeters. Their engine uses a slightly different carburetor design. Their engine has its own characteristic sound, a deep, low, rhythmic pop, pop, pop that is a little slower and a little heavier than Hedstrom's engine produces. The pop, pop, pop is already, even in this first prototype, beginning to sound like what we now call the Harley-Davidson sound. The 4 young men do not realize it yet, but they are tuning an engine whose distinctive voice will eventually be known to hundreds of millions of people across every continent of the world. By the summer of 1903, Harley and the Davidson brothers have finished their first complete motorcycle. They mount their engine in a simple bicycle frame. They add a small fuel tank. They add a leather drive belt running to the rear wheel. They polish the brass fittings. They paint the frame a deep, shining black with a small red pinstripe along the top tube. They step back and look at their machine. They smile. It is the first Harley-Davidson motorcycle. They do not yet know to call it that. They simply call it the motorcycle. But that machine, built in a small wooden shed behind the Davidson family home in Milwaukee in the summer of 1903, is the very first Harley-Davidson. And by the end of 1903, the four young men have built 3 motorcycles and sold 2 of them to local buyers for the price of $200 each, which is a considerable sum of money in 1903. They use the small profit to buy more materials. They begin to work harder. William Harley, who is the most formally trained of the group, takes the lead on engineering. Arthur Davidson, who is the friendliest and most outgoing, takes the lead on sales. Walter Davidson, who is the most hands-on mechanically, takes the lead on production. William A. Davidson, who has the most experience with manufacturing from his work at the railroad, takes the lead on the factory side of the business. In 1906, they move out of the shed and into a small wooden building on Chestnut Street in Milwaukee, which will soon be renamed Juneau Avenue. That small building becomes the first real Harley-Davidson factory. And that address, the corner of Juneau Avenue, is still the address of the Harley-Davidson Global Headquarters today, 120 odd years later. The company has never moved. The shed is gone. The Chestnut Street building is gone. Many newer buildings have been built on the same site over the decades. But Harley-Davidson is still exactly where the 4 young men put it in 1903. Some things, once they are placed in the right spot, simply stay there. By 1907, Harley-Davidson has built and sold about 150 motorcycles. By 1910, they are building thousands of them per year. By 1915, they have grown into one of the largest motorcycle manufacturers in the United States, rivaling Indian and Springfield. The 2 companies become fierce competitors, not in an unfriendly way, but in the way that 2 strong competitors push each other to become better. Indian and Harley-Davidson, throughout the 1910s and the 1920s and the 1930s, will trade the crown of largest American motorcycle manufacturer back and forth. They will race each other. They will advertise against each other. They will build faster and faster bikes, and more reliable engines, and bigger factories. They will both supply motorcycles to the United States military during the First World War, and later during the Second World War. They will both become iconic American brands. They will both become part of the permanent cultural identity of the United States. But in the years we are talking about tonight, the years from 1894 to 1910, Indian and Harley-Davidson are still very young. They're small. They're just getting started. They're still making their first motorcycles in workshops where every single part is hand-assembled. They are still learning what a motorcycle should be. And across the Atlantic, back in Europe, other small companies are also emerging at the same time. Triumph in England is beginning to build its first motorcycles. Peugeot in France. FN in Belgium. Push in Austria. Husqvarna in Sweden. Each one of them is a small family-owned factory, or a small group of enthusiastic inventors, or a small bicycle company transitioning into motorcycles. Each one of them is experimenting with engines and frames and controls. Each one of them is making different choices, trying different designs, learning what works and what does not. By 1910, there are already dozens of motorcycle companies around the world. By 1915, there are hundreds. And from all of those early experiments, the slow, patient shape of the modern motorcycle begins to emerge. The engine begins to sit in a standard location in the frame. The handlebars begin to take a standard shape. The fuel tank begins to sit between the rider's knees. The transmission begins to appear, first as a simple 2-speed system, and later as a more complex 3-speed or 4-speed gearbox. The chain replaces the leather drive belt. The spoked wire wheel replaces the wooden wheel. The pneumatic tire replaces the solid rubber tire. Headlights appear, powered first by acetylene and later by electricity. Speedometers appear. Horns appear. Kickstarters appear. Gradually, over the course of about 20 years, the motorcycle stops being a strange experimental contraption and becomes something that looks, more or less, like the motorcycles we ride today. But all of that development is still in the process of happening. None of it is finished. Every motorcycle built in the early 1900s is, in its own way, a small piece of an unfinished puzzle. Each company is contributing a piece. Each inventor is contributing an idea. The motorcycle, as a machine, is being invented in slow motion by thousands of different people in dozens of different countries, all of them working independently, most of them never meeting one another, all of them adding their small individual contributions to the long, quiet collective work of bringing the motorcycle into existence. It is one of the most beautiful and least dramatic stories in the history of technology. There is no single moment when the motorcycle was invented. There is no single workshop where the modern motorcycle was born. There is no single hero who gets credit for all of it. The motorcycle was built, piece by piece, year by year, workshop by workshop, by a long, slow, patient chain of careful men and women, each of them working on their own small piece of the machine, each of them handing their small improvement forward to the next person in the chain, who took that improvement and added another small improvement on top of it, and passed it forward to the next. And out of that long, slow, patient chain, over the course of about 20 years, the motorcycle gradually came into being. We are still early in the chain tonight. We are still at the very beginning. We have watched Daimler and Maybach build the Reitwagen in 1885. We have watched Hildebrand and Wolfmüller build the first commercial motorrad in 1894. We have watched Hendy and Hedstrom build the first Indian in 1901. We have watched William Harley and the Davidson brothers build the first Harley-Davidson in 1903. And in the next part of our story, we will watch what happens next as motorcycles begin to spread across the world, as they begin to race against each other, as they begin to attract passionate riders, as they begin to develop the culture and personality that will eventually come to define them. But that is for later. That is for another chapter of the story. For now, as tonight's long, slow hour of history continues to unfold, just rest. Just listen. Just let the slow, patient procession of workshops and inventors and wooden frames and brass engines drift through your mind, the way a slow train drifts past a small country station. It is 1885, It is 1894. It is 1901. It is 1903. The years are moving slowly. The workshops are quiet. The young inventors are working by lamplight in small wooden sheds. The first Indian is being bolted together in Springfield. The first Harley Davidson is being painted black in Milwaukee. The first Motorrad is being tested in the streets of Munich. Every small workshop is a little pocket of patient care, and every patient hour of careful work inside those workshops is carrying the slow story of the motorcycle forward, one small step at a time. Outside the workshops, the world is going about its business. Horses are still pulling most of the carts. Most of the streets are still unpaved. Most of the country roads are still dirt tracks. Most people have never seen a motorcycle, and most people who have seen one do not yet understand what it is, or why anyone would want one. The motorcycle is still a strange, exotic toy for a small group of curious enthusiasts. The motorcycle is still a minority interest. The motorcycle is still in the early years of its long, slow rise. And you, listening tonight, are being given a small, quiet privilege. You are being allowed to sit in your own warm resting place, in your own small, soft corner of the world, and walk slowly back through all of these early years. You are being allowed to see the workshops, to smell the oil and the sawdust, to hear the pop, pop, pop of the first engines, to watch the first motorcycles roll out onto the first dirt roads and disappear around the first small curves. This is the gift of a long, slow bedtime history, the gift of being taken somewhere you would never otherwise go, the gift of spending an hour in a time and a place that you cannot actually visit any other way. Rest now. The workshops are warm. The lamps are low. The inventors are quiet. The engines are idling softly. The motorcycles are slowly, patiently, quietly being born. There's nothing you need to do tonight. There is nowhere you need to be tonight. The history will keep unfolding gently at its own pace, and you can drift into and out of it as often as you like. The motorcycle is being invented slowly, patiently, beautifully, one small workshop at a time. If you're still here, let the story continue. And if you've drifted somewhere between a Springfield workshop and a Milwaukee shed, stay there. The slow years are passing. The small inventors are becoming small manufacturers. The small manufacturers are becoming medium-sized companies. The motorcycles themselves are slowly becoming real, reliable, practical machines. Not just experiments, not just curiosities, but actual tools that real people can actually use. We are going to spend tonight's next long, quiet hour in the first decade of the 20th century. The years from about 1900 to 1910. These are the years when the motorcycle stops being something strange and starts becoming something familiar. These are the years when the first motorcycle clubs form. These are the years when the first motorcycle races are held. These are the years when the first ordinary people, farmers, mail carriers, traveling salesmen, police officers, military scouts, begin to consider buying a motorcycle instead of a horse. Let us start slowly in the year 1900. Let us step out of the small workshops we have been visiting and walk out into the wider world of the new century. The year 1900 is a strange, beautiful moment in history. The 20th century has just begun. People all over the world are looking at the calendar and thinking about the future. There's a deep sense in almost every corner of the industrialized world that something is changing. Electric lights are spreading. Telephones are being installed. Motion pictures are being shown in small storefront theaters. The Wright brothers are a few years away from their first airplane flight. The first subway system in New York City is being planned. The first World's Fair of the new century is being held in Paris. Old Queen Victoria of England is in the last year of her long reign. The world is moving into something new, and most people can feel it, even if they cannot quite describe it. Into this changing world, the motorcycle begins to spread. In the early years of the 1900s, the motorcycle is still a minority interest, as we said before. Most people have never seen one. Most people who have seen one think of it as something exotic, a machine for young daredevils, for wealthy hobbyists, for curious engineers. But in a few specific places, the motorcycle begins to catch on more seriously. In Paris, in London, in Milan, in Berlin, in New York, in Chicago, in Los Angeles, in the larger cities of Europe and the United States, where the roads are paved and where there are enough mechanically curious young people with little spare money. The motorcycle begins to find its first real community. Let us step into one of those communities for a moment. Let us go to London in the year 1902. Let us walk slowly through the streets of Piccadilly on a Saturday afternoon in June, and let us see what is beginning to happen. The streets of London in 1902 are still mostly full of horses. Hansom cabs, omnibuses pulled by teams of horses, delivery carts of every size, from the small two-wheel carts of local butchers to the large flatbed wagons of the brewers and the coal merchants. The air is thick with the smell of horses and hay and coal smoke. The cobblestones are slick from the constant rain and damp of an English summer. The sound of hooves on stone is the constant background music of the city. But mixed in with the horses now, on the streets of London, there are a few new machines, a handful of automobiles, expensive, noisy, unreliable things, owned by wealthy enthusiasts who can afford to buy them, and the mechanics who can afford to fix them. And here and there, in smaller numbers, a few motorcycles. Most of them are imported from France or Germany. A few are built in England by a new company called Triumph Cycle Company, which was founded a few years earlier by two German immigrants named Siegfried Bettmann and Maurice Schulte. Triumph is a small company in 1902, based in the industrial city of Coventry. They started out making bicycles, like so many of the early motorcycle companies did. In 1902, they built their first motorcycle, which was not really designed by them, but was actually a bicycle frame with a Belgian Minerva engine bolted onto it. But by the end of the decade, Triumph will be designing and manufacturing their own engines, and they will become one of the great British motorcycle brands, a name that will echo through the next 100 years of motorcycle history. On this Saturday afternoon in Piccadilly, a young man is riding one of these early English motorcycles slowly down the street. He is wearing a long brown leather coat, goggles pushed up on his forehead, and a flat cap pulled down low against the wind. His motorcycle is small and simple, with a single-cylinder engine and a leather drive belt. The engine puts out about 2.5 horsepower, top speed is about 30 miles per hour, although the young man is certainly not going that fast right now. He is riding slowly, carefully, because the streets are crowded with horses and people, and he does not want to startle anyone. As he passes, a group of older men sitting at a sidewalk cafe look up from their newspapers. One of them shakes his head slowly, the way older men shake their heads when they see young people doing foolish things. Another one laughs and says something to his companion. A third one watches the motorcycle with a more thoughtful expression, his eyes following it all the way down the street, as if he is trying to decide whether this strange new machine is actually a foolish toy or something more important. He is not yet sure. Most people in 1902 are not yet sure. The motorcycle continues down the street. The young rider leans gently into a slow curve. The engine pops steadily beneath him. The leather belt drives the rear wheel with a soft slapping sound. A horse pulling a cart flares its nostrils as the motorcycle passes. A child in a park points and shouts. A policeman on the corner watches with a careful, evaluating expression, because the police all across Europe are still trying to figure out how to regulate these new machines. Are they vehicles? Are they bicycles? Do they need license plates? Do the riders need any kind of permit? The laws have not caught up yet with the technology. In 1902, a young man can buy a motorcycle and ride it anywhere he wants, on any road he wants, at any time he wants, without any permission from anyone. That freedom will not last forever, but it is true for now. Let us leave London and cross the Channel to France. Let us go to a small workshop in Paris in the year 1903. Let us watch a brilliant young Frenchman named Louis Clément working on a new motorcycle design. Clément is one of the pioneers of the French motorcycle industry. He and his father have been building bicycles for years. They have also been building small engines. By 1903, they have built a real, proper, elegantly designed French motorcycle with a rear suspension. Yes, a rear suspension in 1903, made from a simple leaf spring. Most motorcycles in 1903 have no rear suspension at all. The rider just absorbs every bump in the road with his own body, which is one of the reasons that early riders often described motorcycle travel as more exhausting than riding a horse. But Clément, thinking patiently about comfort, adds a small suspension, a small piece of steel, flexing slightly with each bump. It is not much, but it is something. And it is one more small, patient step in the long, slow evolution of the motorcycle. Across France, and across Belgium, and across Germany, and across Italy, the similar small improvements are being made. In Milan, the Bianchi company is beginning to build motorcycles. In Munich, a company called NSU is making motorcycles. In Puch, Austria, Johann Puch is building motorcycles. In Sweden, a former arms manufacturer called Husqvarna is about to begin building motorcycles. Every country has its own small pioneer. Every city has its own small workshop. The map of the early motorcycle world is a map of scattered small lights. Each light a little factory, each factory a little team of young men building a few dozen motorcycles a year. Each motorcycle a little experiment in what a motorcycle could be. And then there is America. In the United States, during the years from 1900 to 1910, something remarkable happens. The motorcycle industry in America explodes. not quietly, the way it explodes in Europe, dramatically. Dozens and dozens of new companies are founded. Dozens of new brands appear. Some of them last a year or two and disappear. Some of them last longer. A few of them will eventually become legendary. Let us count just a few of the American motorcycle companies that are founded between 1900 and 1910. In addition to Indian and Harley Davidson, which we have already met, there is some Pope, founded by Colonel Albert Pope, a wealthy bicycle magnate from Hartford, Connecticut. There's Excelsior, founded in Chicago. There's Merkel, founded in Milwaukee, which builds beautiful, advanced motorcycles with features like rear suspension and belt drives. There's Thor, founded by a manufacturing company in Aurora, Illinois. There's Reading Standard in Reading, Pennsylvania. There's Yale in Toledo, Ohio. There's Marsh and Metz and Mitchell and Curtis and Crouch and Cyclone and Flying Merkel and Henderson and Pierce. Dozens of brands. Some of them make just a few dozen motorcycles a year. Some of them make thousands. Together, they form the first great American motorcycle boom, and they create a culture that is beginning to look like something recognizable to anyone who knows motorcycles today. By 1908, the motorcycle industry in the United States is big enough that a group of manufacturers get together and form the Federation of American Motorcyclists. It is the first major motorcycle organization in the world. Its purpose is to represent the interests of motorcyclists, to lobby for fair laws, to organize races and rallies, and to promote motorcycling in general. The Federation of American Motorcyclists holds its first big national rally in 1908 in Philadelphia. Hundreds of motorcyclists ride to Philadelphia from all over the country to participate. They come from New York and Boston and Washington and Atlanta and Cleveland and Chicago. Some of them ride thousands of miles to get there. For most of them, it is the longest motorcycle trip they have ever taken. They are pioneers. They are the first generation of long-distance motorcyclists in the history of the world. And they do not yet know that they are pioneering anything. They just know that they have been invited to a big party in Philadelphia, and they want to go. One of those early long-distance riders is a young woman named Effie Hotchkiss, who, a few years later in 1915, will become the first woman to ride a motorcycle across the entire United States, from Brooklyn, New York, all the way to San Francisco, California, with her mother riding in a sidecar. But we are getting ahead of ourselves. That is still 7 years in the future. In 1908, Effie is still too young. In 1908, women almost never ride motorcycles. The motorcycle is still, mostly, a young man's toy. But even in 1908, there are a few women who have begun to push against that assumption. There is a young woman named Edna Copeland who has ridden her Indian motorcycle from Boston to Washington, D.C. in the summer of 1908, and has written about the experience in a small women's magazine. There is a young woman named Clara Wagner who is racing motorcycles against men in small dirt track races across the Midwest. There is a young woman named Della Crew who's beginning to plan a cross-country trip of her own. These women are few. They are the exception, but they exist. And their existence is part of the slow broadening of what a motorcyclist could be. Let us step for a moment into one of the early motorcycle races. The first organized motorcycle races were held in the late 1890s in Europe. They were rough, informal affairs, just a bunch of young men on their experimental machines racing each other along country roads with no real rules, no real safety equipment, and often no clear finish line. But by the early 1900s, motorcycle racing has become more organized. There are real tracks, real rules, real trophies, and real spectators. Let us go to the Isle of Man in the year 1907. The Isle of Man is a small island in the Irish Sea between England and Ireland, about 33 miles long and 13 miles wide. It is politically a self-governing British Crown dependency, which means it has its own parliament and makes its own laws. And in 1907, the Isle of Man decides to hold a motorcycle race. The race is called the Tourist Trophy, the TT for short. It is run on public roads across the island, which are closed to regular traffic for the day of the race. The first Isle of Man TT is held on May 28th, 1907, and it is won by a motorcyclist named Charlie Collier, riding a matchless motorcycle. Collier averages about 38 miles per hour over a course of about 158 miles. His ride takes a little over 4 hours. A second race for twin-cylinder bikes is won that same day by a man named Rem Fowler, riding a Norton motorcycle, who averages about 36 miles per hour. The Isle of Man TT is still held today, every year, 118 years after that first race in 1907. It is the oldest continuously running motorcycle race in the world. It is considered by many riders to be the most challenging and the most dangerous motorcycle race in existence. Modern riders race the Isle of Man TT on motorcycles that can reach over 200 miles per hour, and they lean into corners at impossible angles. And they know every time they line up at the starting line that they are riding the same roads that Charlie Collier and Rem Fowler rode in 1907. The race has a long memory. The island has a long memory. And every year when the TT is run, the ghosts of those early riders are riding alongside the modern ones in some quiet way that only riders can really understand. But in 1907 itself, the TT is still just a strange new event. The roads of the Isle of Man are still dirt. The motorcycles are still small. The spectators are modest in number. The race is covered by only a few small newspapers. Nobody at the time realizes that they are attending the birth of one of the most important racing events in the history of motorsports. They are just watching a strange little race on a strange little island on a cool May afternoon in the early years of a new century. Let us return to America for a moment. Let us travel in the year 1908 to a small town in California. There is a man there named Oscar Hedstrom. The same Oscar Hedstrom who co-founded the Indian Motorcycle Company in Springfield in 1901. Hedstrom has driven his own Indian motorcycle from Springfield to California as a promotional tour. It is an enormous trip. The roads between the East Coast and the West Coast in 1908 are mostly unpaved. Many of them are barely more than dirt tracks. Some of them are completely impassable in bad weather. There are no gas stations. There are no motorcycle shops. There are no road maps designed for motorcyclists. Hedstrom has to carry extra fuel in cans strapped to his bike. He has to carry spare parts. He has to carry tools. he has to know how to fix his motorcycle himself if anything goes wrong, because there is no one else who can help him in most of the places he is riding through. And yet he does it. He rides his Indian from Springfield to Los Angeles. He takes weeks to make the trip. He sleeps in small hotels along the way. He eats simple meals in small roadside cafes. He has long conversations with curious townspeople at every stop. Because in most places, he is the first person they have ever seen on a motorcycle. The trip is a publicity stunt for Indian. They want to prove that their motorcycles can make long cross-country journeys. But it is also, in its own quiet way, one of the first great American motorcycle adventures. Hedstrom is not just promoting a product. He is demonstrating a new kind of freedom. He is showing, by his example, that a motorcycle can take a person across an entire continent if the person is willing to be patient and persistent and a little bit brave. Back in Springfield, Indian Motorcycle continues to grow. By 1909, they are the largest motorcycle manufacturer in the United States. Their factory covers several city blocks. They employ hundreds of workers. They build thousands of motorcycles a year. Their motorcycles are sold in every state in the Union and exported to several foreign countries. Their racing team dominates the major American motorcycle races. The Indian logo, a simple script, Indian, painted in red on a black fuel tank, becomes one of the most recognizable symbols of the early motorcycle era. In Milwaukee, Harley-Davidson is also growing, not as quickly as Indian, but steadily. By 1909, Harley-Davidson is building about 1,000 motorcycles a year. Their factory on Juneau Avenue has expanded several times. They have added a second story. They've added a third. They have begun exporting motorcycles to Japan and to Australia and to parts of Europe. They have begun to develop their first V-twin engine, a twin-cylinder engine with the two cylinders arranged in a V shape, 45 degrees apart. The V-twin configuration gives the engine more power than a single cylinder, while still being compact enough to fit in a motorcycle frame. The first Harley-Davidson V-twin is introduced in 1909. It is not entirely successful. The early version has some design problems that cause it to be withdrawn after only a few months. But it points the way toward the future. Within a few years, Harley will have perfected the V-twin, and the V-twin engine will become the signature engine configuration of the Harley-Davidson brand. Every Harley-Davidson built from the 1910s until today, with a few small exceptions, has been a V-twin. That deep, throbbing pop, pop, pop that every Harley rider knows. That is the sound of a V-twin. And that sound and that engine configuration trace back to the year 1909 in Milwaukee, when the four young men decided that one cylinder was no longer enough. Let us step for a moment into the Harley-Davidson factory in the year 1910. The factory is still on Juneau Avenue. It is bigger than it used to be, but it is still modest by modern standards. About 150 workers are employed there. The factory has a long wooden floor, tall windows that let in plenty of daylight, and rows of workbenches along both walls. Motorcycle frames hang from ceiling hooks, moving slowly along a rudimentary assembly line as workers add each component in turn. The air smells of machine oil and leather and hot metal. There is a constant low hum of small electric motors driving the machinery. William Harley is in his early 30s now. He is no longer the young man who sat in the Davidson family shed in 1901. He is now the chief engineer of a real motorcycle company. He wears a white shirt and dark tie under his work apron. His hair has grown out slightly. He has more responsibility than he used to. He is serious, thoughtful, careful. Arthur Davidson is standing beside him, also in his early 30s now, also dressed in the clothes of a successful small businessman. Walter Davidson walks through the factory every morning, checking on every workbench, making sure that each worker is doing his job correctly. William A. Davidson, the oldest brother, runs the production side of the factory. He knows every machine in the building. He knows every worker by name. He knows exactly how long it takes to build a motorcycle from start to finish. And he knows exactly where the bottlenecks are in the production process. The four of them, Harley and the three Davidsons, will lead Harley Davidson together for many years. They will become one of the most successful business teams in the history of American manufacturing. And they will do it without ever having a single serious disagreement about strategy. They will work together, quietly, patiently, carefully for decades, and their company will grow, slowly and steadily, into the iconic American brand that it still is today. In 1910, Harley-Davidson and Indian are the two largest motorcycle companies in America. But they are not alone. There are still dozens of other American brands. There are still hundreds of European brands. There are still small workshops in Japan and Australia and South Africa and Argentina and Russia, where young mechanical men are building their own experimental motorcycles. The motorcycle in 1910 has become a global phenomenon. Not yet a mass phenomenon, but a global one. In every industrialized country in the world, there are now motorcyclists. In every major city, there are motorcycle dealerships. In every mechanical journal, there are articles about motorcycles. The motorcycle has made its transition from strange experimental curiosity to real, respected, serious form of transportation. It has taken 25 years to make that transition, counting from Daimler's Reitwagen in 1885. A quarter of a century of slow, patient development. A quarter of a century of small workshops, young inventors, and careful hand-assembled machines. The motorcycle in 1910 is still much simpler than the motorcycle we know today. Most of them still have leather drive belts instead of chains. Most of them still have single-speed transmissions. You start the motorcycle, and you ride it at whatever speed the engine happens to be turning, with no way to shift gears. Most of them still have no kickstarter. You have to push the motorcycle forward with your feet, or pedal it like a bicycle until the engine catches. Most of them still have no electric lighting. You ride at night with an acetylene lamp mounted on the front of the frame, or you don't ride at night at all. Most of them still have no rear suspension, and the front suspension is usually just a simple spring fork. Riding a motorcycle in 1910 is, by modern standards, a rough, uncomfortable, demanding experience. It is not the smooth, comfortable ride we know today, but it is also, to the people who love it, something wonderful. The early motorcyclists of the 1900s, the young men and the few young women who bought these small, patient machines and rode them down the country roads of the early 20th century, described their experiences in their letters and their diaries and their magazine articles with a kind of quiet joy. They talk about the feeling of the wind on their faces. They talk about the feeling of covering a long distance under their own power without depending on a horse or a train. They talk about the freedom. They talk about the way the world opens up when you can go anywhere you want, at any time you want, for as long as the fuel in your tank will carry you. They describe, in their own early words, the same feelings that motorcyclists today still describe. The pleasure of the road, the pleasure of the engine, the pleasure of moving under your own power through a wide open world. That pleasure, that feeling, is one of the deepest reasons the motorcycle survived. The motorcycle is not just a machine. The motorcycle is a kind of small freedom. The motorcycle is a kind of small adventure. The motorcycle is a way of being in the world that cannot be replicated by any other form of transportation. And the people who discovered that in the early 1900s fell in love with it the way people today still fall in love with it. And they told their friends, and their friends told their friends. And the small community of early motorcyclists grew quietly, year by year, into a slightly larger community, and then into a medium-sized community, and then into a global culture that now includes hundreds of millions of people in every country on Earth. But all of that is still ahead. We are still in 1910. The global motorcycle culture has not yet fully formed. The community is still small. The machines are still simple. The industry is still young. The 20th century is still young. The world is still mostly horse-powered, even in the big cities. The air is still mostly quiet, without the sounds of cars and airplanes and buses that will eventually fill it. The long, slow afternoons of the early motorcycle era are still happening, and they will continue to happen for a few more years until the First World War arrives and changes everything and ends one chapter of the motorcycle story while beginning a new and much darker one. But that is for later. That is for the next part of the story. Tonight, we are only in 1910. The war is still 4 years away. The roads are still mostly quiet. The motorcycles are still small and simple and beautifully handmade. The workshops are still run by young inventors who know every customer by name. The races are still attended by a few hundred quiet enthusiasts instead of millions of people on television. The motorcycle is still a small, patient thing, slowly growing up, slowly becoming itself. Rest now. Let the slow, patient procession of early years drift through your mind. The year 1900, the year 1902, the year 1903, the year 1905, the year 1907, the year 1910. Each year a small step forward. Each year a small improvement. Each year a slightly better motorcycle. A slightly larger community of riders. A slightly bigger chapter of the slow, quiet story that we are telling together tonight. Outside the workshops, the horses are still pulling most of the carts. The streets are still mostly dirt. The world is still slow. But inside the workshops, in every country, on every continent, the motorcycle is slowly becoming itself. Piece by piece, year by year, rider by rider. And you, listening quietly tonight, are being allowed to witness it all in slow motion. You are being allowed to walk through the London streets of 1902. You are being allowed to stand on the Isle of Man for the first tea race in 1907. You are being allowed to visit the Indian factory in Springfield in 1908. You are being allowed to watch William Harley and the Davidson brothers expand their small factory on Juneau Avenue, year by year, until it becomes one of the most famous motorcycle factories in the world. It is a small privilege, and it is yours tonight for as long as you want to stay with it, and as long as you want to drift with it. Rest now. The workshops are warm. The motorcycles are slow. The years are patient. The story is unfolding, and nothing at all is asking anything of you. If you're still with me, let the story continue. And if you've drifted somewhere between a 1908 Philadelphia rally and the soft pop, pop, pop of a 1910 Harley-Davidson V-twin, stay there. The years are moving on. The motorcycle is maturing. The early golden era is beginning to close. And the world, although it does not know it yet, is about to change in ways that will never be undone. We are going to spend tonight's final long quiet hour in the decade of the 1910s. These are the years when the motorcycle grows up. These are the years when it becomes, for the first time, a real tool. Not just a toy for enthusiasts, not just a machine for racers, but a practical piece of equipment that ordinary people use for ordinary reasons. These are also the years when the motorcycle is pulled, for the first time, into the great machinery of history, into war, into mass production, into a world that is changing faster than it has ever changed before. Let us begin, slowly, in the year 1911. Let us walk through a small American town on a warm spring morning. The streets are still mostly dirt. The buildings are still mostly wooden. The horses are still everywhere. But in the middle of the town square, parked at the curb in front of a small hardware store, there's a motorcycle. It is a black Harley-Davidson single-cylinder with a leather belt drive and a small brass headlight. And it belongs to a man named Thomas. Thomas is the town's postman. Until recently, Thomas delivered the mail on horseback. For almost 20 years, he rode the same brown mare along the same routes, through every season, through every kind of weather. His horse was a good horse. She knew the routes better than he did. She knew which houses had dogs that needed to be watched. She knew which streams were too deep to cross in the spring. She knew to stop at certain houses even before Thomas pulled on the reins, because those were the houses where the owners always came out to chat. But last year, the post office bought Thomas a motorcycle. They told him the motorcycle would allow him to cover his entire route in half the time. They told him he could deliver more mail, more quickly, to more people. And they were right. The motorcycle is much faster than the horse. On a good day, with dry roads, Thomas can finish his route up by midday instead of working until sunset. He can deliver mail to farms that, just a few years ago, only received their mail once a week, because the horseback route could not reach them more often than that. Now with the motorcycle, Thomas can deliver mail to those distant farms 3 or 4 times a week. But Thomas is ambivalent about the change. He misses his horse. The horse was sold to a neighboring farmer, and she's living out a comfortable retirement, pulling a small hay cart in the pastures. Thomas visits her sometimes on his days off. She recognizes him. She comes to the fence when he calls her name. He pats her on the nose and gives her a small apple and stands there for a while, just talking to her. Then he rides his motorcycle home, and he hangs up his helmet, and he makes his supper, and he goes to bed, and he thinks about how strange it is that the world is changing so fast. All across America, in the early 1910s, similar small changes are happening. Post offices are buying the motorcycles. Police departments are buying motorcycles. Delivery companies are buying motorcycles. Doctors are buying motorcycles. Because in the early 1910s, rural doctors still make house calls. And a motorcycle can take a country doctor from one patient's bedside to another much faster than a horse and buggy. Farmers are buying motorcycles to ride into town. Traveling salesmen are buying motorcycles to cover their territories. Missionaries are buying motorcycles to reach remote villages in parts of the country where the roads are too rough for automobiles. The motorcycle in the early 1910s is becoming practical. It is becoming useful. It is becoming, for the first time, part of the everyday machinery of American life. And at the same time, something similar is happening in Europe. Let us travel across the Atlantic to England in the year 1912. Let us go to the city of Coventry, where the Triumph Motorcycle Company has been quietly growing for the last decade. Triumph, by 1912, is no longer the small bicycle company it was when it started. Triumph is now a real motorcycle manufacturer with a real factory, building several thousand motorcycles a year. Their motorcycles are ridden all over Britain by postmen, by policemen, by delivery men, by farmers, by dispatch riders, by young enthusiasts. The Triumph factory in Coventry is a large brick building on the banks of a canal. Tall windows let in the soft gray light of the English Midlands. Inside, several hundred workers are moving quietly among long rows of workbenches. The air smells of oil and coal smoke and leather and tea. The workers drink tea constantly throughout the day in tin mugs while they work. There is a low, constant hum of small machines running, the sound of hammers tapping on metal, the soft hiss of a welder's torch somewhere in the back of the factory. The Triumph motorcycle being built here in 1912 is a machine called the Model H. It has a single-cylinder engine that puts out about 4 horsepower. It has a simple 3-speed gearbox, one of the first real 3-speed gearboxes in motorcycle history. It has a proper chain drive instead of a leather belt. It has a front suspension fork. It is painted a deep, glossy green with gold pinstripes along the fuel tank. It costs about 60 pounds, which is a significant sum of money in 1912. About 3 months' wages for a skilled worker. But it is still within reach of many middle-class buyers. The Model H is a success. Triumph builds about 6,000 of them in the first year. They sell in England, in Scotland, in Wales, in Ireland, in France, in Belgium, in Germany, in Australia, and in several colonies of the British Empire. Triumph motorcycles are being ridden all over the world. And Triumph is not alone. Norton and Matchless and Sunbeam and Scott and AJS and BSA, all British motorcycle companies, are building their own successful machines. The British motorcycle industry in the early 1910s is one of the strongest motorcycle industries in the world. In France, Peugeot and Terreau are building motorcycles. In Belgium, Effen and Minerva are building motorcycles. In Germany, NSU and DKW and Wanderer are building motorcycles. In Italy, Galera and Bianchi are building motorcycles. In Austria, Puch is building motorcycles. The global motorcycle industry in 1912 is thriving. It is a healthy, competitive, geographically distributed industry with dozens of small to medium-sized manufacturers in every industrialized country. And then, in the summer of 1914, the First World War begins. The war changes everything. Let us pause for a moment and acknowledge what the First World War does to the world of 1914. It is one of the most catastrophic events in human history. It kills millions of young men. It destroys cities and villages across Europe. It redraws the maps of entire continents. It breaks old empires and creates new countries. It ends one version of the world and begins another. By the time the war ends in 1918, more than 16 million people will be dead. The 20th century, which began with so much optimism and so much sense of progress, has revealed its dark side. Nothing will ever be quite the same again. For the motorcycle industry, the First World War is both a disaster and an opportunity. It is a disaster because many of the young men who would have been motorcyclists or motorcycle workers or motorcycle customers are now soldiers. The factories of Europe are suddenly short of workers. The customers are suddenly short of money. The civilian motorcycle market almost disappears overnight. Many small motorcycle companies close their doors because they cannot find enough workers to build their products or enough customers to buy them. The pioneer era of small independent workshops and small family-owned factories is effectively ended by the war. Some of those small companies never reopen. The names disappear from catalogs and from history. But the war is also an opportunity, because every major army in the war needs motorcycles. Motorcycles are useful in war. They can carry dispatches faster than a horse. They can operate in places where automobiles cannot go. They can be used for reconnaissance. They can be used for courier duties. They can carry messages across battlefields where telephone lines have been cut. They can evacuate wounded soldiers on stretchers strapped to sidecars. They can pull small carts carrying ammunition and supplies. They can mount machine guns on sidecars for mobile fire support. And so, while the civilian motorcycle market collapses, the military motorcycle market explodes. Harley-Davidson and Indian in the United States begin producing motorcycles for the British Army, the French Army, and later, when America enters the war in 1917, for the American Army. Harley-Davidson alone will produce more than 20,000 motorcycles for the military by the end of the war. About half of all the motorcycles the company produces during those 4 years. Indian produces even more. Triumph in England produces about 30,000 motorcycles for the British military, most of them the Model H, which becomes known among British soldiers as the trusty Triumph, because it is so reliable and so easy to maintain in the harsh conditions of the Western Front. Let us walk for a moment through the fields of northern France in the year 1916. Let us leave the quiet workshops and the country roads and go just for a little while into the war. The Western Front in 1916 is a long line of trenches and mud and barbed wire stretching from the English Channel to the Swiss border, a distance of about 450 miles. The trenches are dug in parallel rows, One side for the Germans, one side for the British and French. Between the two sets of trenches is a narrow strip of empty land called No Man's Land, shelled into a lunar landscape of craters and wreckage. The soldiers live in the trenches for weeks or months at a time. They sleep in the mud. They eat cold food out of tin cans. They share their quarters with rats and lice. They are bombarded constantly by artillery. Many of them will die without ever seeing the enemy. And between the trenches and the command posts further back, dispatch riders are moving. These are young men on motorcycles, carrying written orders, intelligence reports, maps, and personal messages between the front lines and the higher levels of command. The telephone lines across the Western Front are constantly being cut by artillery fire. Radio communication is still primitive and unreliable. The fastest and most dependable way to get a message from one part of the battlefield to another is to put it on a piece of paper and hand it to a young man on a motorcycle. The dispatch riders of the First World War are some of the bravest motorcyclists in history. They ride day and night, through rain and snow and mud, often under artillery fire, on roads that have been shelled into chaos. They ride Triumph Model Huntington Douglas motorcycles and Matchless and Indian and Harley-Davidson machines. They carry their messages in leather pouches strapped across their chests. They wear heavy leather coats and goggles and steel helmets. Many of them are killed by artillery, by machine gun fire, by crashes on the treacherous roads. But the ones who survive develop an extraordinary skill at riding in almost impossible conditions. They become, in a quiet way, some of the best motorcycle riders the world has ever seen. One of those dispatch riders is a young British soldier whose name we do not remember. He is 19 years old. He comes from a small village in Yorkshire. Before the war, he worked as a blacksmith's apprentice, and he rode a small Sunbeam motorcycle that he had saved for 2 years to buy. When the war began, he volunteered. The army gave him a Triumph Model H and a set of thick leather gloves and a pair of goggles and a small leather pouch for messages. He has been writing dispatches for about a year and a half. Let us follow him, very slowly, through an ordinary working night in 1916. It is about 1 o'clock in the morning. The sky is overcast. There is a light drizzle falling. The temperature is just above freezing. He has been called to a small command post about 3 miles behind the front lines. He is handed a leather pouch containing several sealed envelopes. He is told to deliver them to a divisional headquarters about 12 miles to the rear. He is told to go quickly. He is told to be careful. He puts the pouch under his coat. He adjusts his helmet. He pulls his goggles down over his eyes. He starts his motorcycle. The Model H coughs, sputters, and then catches with its familiar steady pop, pop, pop. He rolls slowly out of the command post courtyard and onto the muddy road. The roads of northern France in 1916 are terrible. They were never good to begin with. They were country roads, built for horse traffic, not for heavy military use. And after 2 years of war, they are almost destroyed. They are full of shell craters. They are full of deep ruts from the wheels of artillery pieces and supply wagons. They are covered in a thick layer of mud that never dries because the drizzle never stops. The young rider has to navigate this road in the dark with a single small acetylene lamp on the front of his motorcycle. He cannot use the lamp too brightly because he does not want to attract attention from German observers. He rides with the lamp turned down low, steering mostly by the feel of the road under his wheels. He hears the artillery in the distance, dull thuds from far away. Occasionally, closer, the sharper crack of a shell landing within a mile or two. He does not stop for it. He keeps riding. He has learned to tell from the sound of the artillery whether a shell is coming close enough to worry about. Most of them are not. The ones that are, he cannot do anything about anyway, so he just keeps riding. He passes a column of soldiers walking in the opposite direction, heading toward the front lines. They're going up to replace another regiment that has been pulled back for rest. They're tired. They're quiet. They do not talk as they walk. The young rider nods to them as he passes. A few of them nod back. Most of them do not notice him at all. They're too tired, too cold, too focused on putting one foot in front of the other. He continues. The road climbs a small hill. He has to shift down into a lower gear. The engine works harder. The back wheel slips in the mud. He keeps his balance by letting his feet skim along the ground on either side. He reaches the top of the hill. The road levels out. He shifts back up. He passes a small village that has been destroyed by shelling. The houses are ruined. The church tower has been broken in half. There is no light anywhere in the village, except the thin beam of his own motorcycle lamp, sweeping across the ruined walls. He rides through the village slowly, picking his way around piles of rubble. A dog barks somewhere in the ruins. A stray dog, probably. The dogs of France, during the war, learned to survive in the destroyed villages by scavenging for food. The young rider thinks about the dog. He wishes he could stop and give the dog something, but he has nothing to give. He keeps riding. Beyond the village, the road improves slightly. He can ride a little faster. He can make better time. He reaches a crossroads where a military policeman is standing under a small canvas canopy, checking papers. He slows down and shows his dispatch papers. The policeman nods and waves him through. He accelerates again. The engine pops steadily in the cold, wet night. He reaches the divisional headquarters about an hour later. He pulls up in front of the main building, a large stone farmhouse that the army has taken over. A staff officer is waiting for him on the front steps, wrapped in a heavy wool coat. The rider dismounts, takes the leather pouch out from under his coat, hands it to the officer. The officer thanks him. The officer tells him there are 2 more pouches to deliver, further back, to a corps headquarters. The young rider nods. He does not complain. He climbs back on his Triumph. He starts the engine again. He rolls back out into the rain. He continues the night. By dawn, he has delivered 6 dispatches. He has ridden perhaps 50 miles in total. He is exhausted. He is covered in mud. His hands are numb inside his gloves. His face is raw from the cold wind. He finds his way back to his billet, a small bunk in a shared room in an old farmhouse, and he collapses onto the bed without even taking off his boots. Within 30 seconds, he is asleep. He is one dispatch rider. There are thousands like him on every side of the war, doing the same kind of work, night after night, for 4 years. Many of them die. Many of them survive. The ones who survive come home to their countries after the war and try to return to civilian life. Some of them never stop loving motorcycles after the war. Some of them become motorcycle instructors, or motorcycle salesmen, or motorcycle mechanics. Some of them start their own motorcycle businesses. The Royal Enfield Company in England grows rapidly in the 1920s because so many former British Army dispatch riders become customers. They learned to ride on Royal Enfields during the war, and they stayed loyal to the brand afterward. The Triumph Company grows rapidly for the same reason. Harley-Davidson grows rapidly for the same reason. Tens of thousands of American soldiers learned to ride on Harley-Davidsons during the war, and many of them become lifelong Harley customers. The First World War, as terrible as it is, cements the motorcycle's place in the modern world. Before the war, the motorcycle was still, to many people, a curious novelty. After the war, the motorcycle is a proven, reliable, essential tool. Armies know it, governments know it, police departments know it, and millions of former soldiers, now civilians, know it too. They have ridden motorcycles in the worst conditions imaginable, and the motorcycles have carried them through. They trust these machines in a way that no advertising campaign could ever create. In 1918, when the war finally ends, the motorcycle industry is exhausted, but also transformed. Many of the small companies that existed before the war are gone, but the big companies that survived, Harley-Davidson, Indian, Triumph, Norton, BMW in Germany, which was founded during the war as an aircraft engine maker and would not begin building motorcycles until 1923. FN in Belgium, Peugeot in France, are larger and stronger than they have ever been. They have government contracts. They have experienced workforces. They have improved manufacturing techniques that they learned during wartime production. They are ready for what comes next. What comes next is the 1920s, the era of mass production, the era when the motorcycle stops being a luxury good for enthusiasts and becomes an affordable, practical vehicle for millions of ordinary people. The era when motorcycle racing becomes a major spectator sport. The era when the first motorcycle gangs form, for better or worse. The era when the motorcycle becomes part of popular culture, part of movies, part of novels, part of songs, part of the way people dream about freedom and speed and the open road. But the 1920s are beyond the scope of tonight's story. Tonight, we have only walked together from 1860 to 1918. 58 years of slow, patient history. From a world that had never heard of a motorcycle to a world where the motorcycle has become a permanent part of modern life. From Daimler's wooden Reitwagen in Cannstatt to dispatch riders on muddy French roads delivering urgent messages in the middle of the night. From a world of horses and cobblestones to a world where every industrial country has a motorcycle industry. From a world where only a handful of patient inventors had ever seen an internal combustion engine, to a world where millions of people have ridden a motorcycle. It is one of the slow, quiet, beautiful stories of the modern age. And tonight, we have walked through it together, one small chapter at a time, at the pace of a person who is getting ready to sleep. Let us pause at the end, in the year 1918. The war has just ended. The armistice was signed on November 11th at 11 o'clock in the morning in a railway carriage in a forest in northeastern France. All across Europe, the guns have gone silent. The soldiers are beginning to come home. The motorcycle factories are beginning to retool for civilian production. The world is beginning to breathe out slowly, after 4 years of holding its breath. In a small village in northern England, a young woman is standing at the gate of her family's farm. Her husband is coming home today. He left 4 years ago. She has not seen him since. He was a dispatch rider in the Royal Signals. He survived the war, mostly unharmed, although he has been wounded twice, and he has seen things that he will not talk about for the rest of his life. She received a telegram last week telling her that he was being sent home. She has been standing at the gate every afternoon since then, watching the road, waiting to see him appear. And today, at last, she sees him, a small figure on a motorcycle coming slowly up the road. He is wearing his military coat. His helmet is slung over the handlebar. He is riding the same Triumph Model H that he rode during the war. The Army has given it to him as a discharge gift, the way they have given many of their motorcycles to their veterans, because the Army has more motorcycles than it knows what to do with in peacetime. He sees her at the gate. He slows down. He stops the motorcycle in front of the gate. He shuts off the engine. The pop, pop, pop of the Triumph fades into the quiet of the English countryside. He climbs off the motorcycle slowly. He walks to the gate. They look at each other for a long moment, neither of them speaking. And then she opens the gate, and he steps through, and they hold each other for a very long time. The Triumph stands quietly by the gate, its engine ticking softly as it cools. The leather saddle is worn and cracked. The brass fittings are dulled by years of weather. The frame is dented in a few places where it has fallen during hard rides. But it is running. It made it through the war. It is, in its own quiet way, a survivor. It is one of the many motorcycles of that generation. It will be ridden for another 20 years along country roads and into market towns and on weekend trips to the coast. It will teach the young man's children to ride, one by one, as they grow up. It will eventually be retired in the 1940s to a small shed behind the farmhouse, where it will sit in gathering dust for decades. And then, sometime in the 1970s, the young man's grandson, grown up by now with his own children, will find the old Triumph in the shed, and he will clean it up, and he will restore it, and he will ride it again on Sunday afternoons along the same country roads that his grandfather used to ride it on. That is the long, slow, beautiful life of a motorcycle, built in a factory by careful hands, ridden by one person, and then another, and then another, passed down through a family, restored by people who love it, ridden for decades, loved for decades. Part of the everyday beauty of the world, for as long as anyone cares to take care of it. And tonight, we have walked slowly through the first 58 years of that kind of life. We have seen motorcycles being born. We have seen them grow up. We have seen them go to war and come home. We have seen them carry postmen and policemen and doctors and dispatch riders and young enthusiasts and old farmers. We have seen them spread across the world, quietly and patiently, year by year, decade by decade, workshop by workshop. The story is not over. The story will never be over. Motorcycles will continue to be built and ridden and loved for as long as there are roads and engines and people who want to feel the wind on their faces as they move slowly or quickly through an open world. But tonight, our part of the story is finished. We have walked all the way from 1860 to 1918, from a world before motorcycles to a world where the motorcycle has become part of everyday life. From Cannstatt to Munich to Springfield to Milwaukee to Coventry to the muddy battlefields of France. From Gottlieb Daimler and Wilhelm Maybach to the young dispatch rider coming home to his wife at the gate of a small farm in northern England. That is enough history for one night. That is enough slow, patient walking for one night. That is enough small workshops and small engines and small beginnings for one night. Now it is time to rest. Now it is time to let the whole long, slow story of the early motorcycle era settle into the quiet place inside you where good stories always settle. Let the names of the early inventors fade gently. Let the sound of the pop, pop, pop of the first engines become the soft rhythm of your own breathing. Let the small wooden workshops of Cannstatt and Springfield and Milwaukee and Coventry become small, warm, glowing rooms inside your mind, glowing gently in the distance, lit by soft yellow lamps, quiet and patient and kind. The motorcycles have been invented. The factories have been built. The dispatch riders have come home. The wars have ended. The long, quiet work of the pioneer era is complete. And you, listening tonight, have walked through all of it at the slow, patient pace of a person who is getting ready to sleep. You have done more than you think tonight. You have sat quietly for an hour inside one of the gentler stories of the modern world. You have paid attention, or you have not paid attention, and either way is perfect. Either way is exactly what tonight was for. Rest now. The history will always be here. The workshops will always be glowing somewhere in the quiet place inside you, warm and patient and kind. The motorcycles will always be there too, sitting on their wooden stands, waiting for dawn, waiting for the next rider, waiting for the long road that stretches gently out into whatever comes next. There is nothing more you need to do tonight. You have come to the end of the story. Sleep well. The Reitwagen is asleep in its museum in Stuttgart. The Triumph is asleep by the gate of a farmhouse in Yorkshire. The Indian is asleep in a barn in Massachusetts. The Harley-Davidson is asleep in a small garage in Milwaukee. Every motorcycle in the world, right now, in your sleep, is slowly, quietly, patiently ticking as it cools in the dark. And you, listening tonight, are slowly, quietly, patiently drifting into the same kind of deep, soft dark that motorcycles drift into when they are finally at rest. Good night, traveler. Good night. The story is finished. Sleep well.